So I wanted to talk to you guys about Chuck Schumer's speech on Israel. Now, Chuck Schumer historically has been a gigantic supporter of Israel within the Democratic Party. In fact, he is particularly important for Israel because he is one of the most senior Democratic politicians. He is the Senate Majority Leader, and he has a long-standing history of supporting Israel. And on top of that, he's the most senior Jewish man in American politics. He's the most high-ranking Jewish person in U.S. politics. And so if you had followed Netanyahu, Schumer's career and his commentary on Israel, you would be very surprised to see his speech yesterday, where he tore Netanyahu a new one and said that Israel will probably be unable to move on and unable to bring peace until Netanyahu is gone. And that out of the barriers to peace, he gave like 4 barriers, Netanyahu was one of the major ones. And this speech sent shockwaves through Israeli political society and sent shockwaves through the Capitol. The White House was told in advance that he was going to make a speech, but they were not told the nature of that speech. So it probably surprised them as well. And I mean, it probably should be surprising because this is a man who has generally been in Israel's corner in every circumstance that you can imagine. So this isn't coming from a position of, oh, I don't like Israel, yada, yada, yada. It's coming from a position of he genuinely supports Israel. He genuinely would like to see Israel do well. He would genuinely like Israel to be safe and by extension, keep us out of conflict. And he thinks Netanyahu is compromising that goal. And this isn't just like Timbuktu down randomly, some House member here, some House member there, some state delegate. This is, again, the most senior ranking Jewish man in American politics and one of Israel's longest defenders in the American Senate. And this is somebody that our government would usually somewhat take point on when it comes to supporting Israel in the Senate. So this is substantial, and we are going to watch the speech because I do think it is somewhat historic that he made that speech. And the headlines coming out of this are probably very concerning for those in Tel Aviv. U.S. patience with Netanyahu is running out. That's the Time headline. So I wanted to check out this speech, and we're going to watch it, and then we're going to watch Biden's short reaction to it because he did give a statement to the press about this speech. But this really did send a lot of shockwaves, so I'm interested to watch it. I haven't watched it yet. I've read the summary of him talking about barriers to peace and stuff like that. So I want to see how harsh it is off the written word. Let's check it out.
As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. The world has changed radically since then, and the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past. Nobody expects Prime Minister Netanyahu to do the things that must be done to break the cycle of violence, to preserve Israel's credibility on the world stage, and to work towards a two-state solution. If he were to disavow Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and kick them out of his governing coalition, that would be a real meaningful step forward. But regrettably, there's no reason to believe Prime Minister Netanyahu would do that. He won't disavow me.
He would lose his governing coalition, and it would mean early elections, which he would almost certainly lose because Benny Gantz is ahead of him.
Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and their calls for Israelis to drive Palestinians out of Gaza and the West Bank. He won't commit to a military operation in Rafah that prioritizes protecting civilian life. He won't engage responsibly in discussions about a day-after plan for Gaza and a longer-term pathway to peace. Hamas and the Palestinians who support and tolerate their evil ways, radical right-wing Israelis in government and society, President Abbas, Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Bam.
These are the 4 obstacles to peace. And if we fail to overcome them, then Israel and the West Bank and Gaza will be trapped in the same violent state of affairs they've experienced for the last 75 years. These obstacles are not the same in their culpability for the present state of affairs, but arguing over which is the worst stymies our ability to achieve peace. Given the complexity and gravity of this undertaking, many different groups have a responsibility to see it through.
Can I just say something quick here, right? And, you know, this speech goes on for a bit. I think we'll try to watch most of it, if not all of it. This gives a lot of cover to Democrat House members who have been wanting to criticize Netanyahu more directly and the Israeli government more directly. This is going to give them a lot more wiggle room to come out publicly and possibly even go further than Chuck Schumer goes here. In fact, I can almost say certainly that individuals like Jamal Bowman, Rashida Tlaib, AOC are going to go farther than Chuck Schumer is going here. And by him doing this and, you know, getting all the articles written about him in Time Magazine, getting all the segments on Fox News, getting the president asked about him, that gives them a lot more wiggle room. And don't be surprised if after this speech, you're going to see an uptick in critique directed towards the Israeli government, directed specifically also towards Netanyahu, about how the war is being managed, what led up to October 7th, why October 7th was as deadly as it was when it comes to security failures, and more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so on and so on. He's a bitch ass hoe, whatever they want to say.
The Palestinian people must reject Hamas and the extremism in their midst. They know better than anybody how Hamas has used them as pawns, how Hamas has tortured and punished Palestinians who seek peace. Quite frankly, I haven't heard enough Palestinian leaders express anguish about Hamas and other extreme elements of Palestinian society. I implore them to speak up now, even when it may be hardest, because that is the only true way to honor the lives of all those lost, by transcending the enmity and bloodshed and working together in good faith for a better future. Once Hamas is deprived of power, the Palestinians will be much freer to choose a government they want and deserve. With the prospect of a real two-state solution on the table, and for the first time, genuine statehood for the Palestinian people, I believe they will be far more likely to support more mainstream leaders committed to peace. I think the same is true for the Israeli people. Call me an optimist, but I believe that if the Israeli public is presented with a path to a two-state solution that offers a chance at lasting peace and coexistence, then most mainstream Israelis will moderate their views and support it.
There's been polling data already done on this. If you ask Israelis straight up, do you want a two-state solution? Specifically, do you want a Palestinian state? They'll say no. But if polled about the Saudi peace plan in specifics, when told this is what their peace plan is, which would include the Arabs rebuilding the Gaza Strip, it would include the returning of all Israeli hostages. That means both civilian and military. It would mean, it would probably also mean an exchange the other direction as well, but that wasn't, I don't think that was discussed extensively. It would mean a future Palestinian state, but that future Palestinian state would be demilitarized, meaning they could not have an armed forces and would probably have some maybe extended kind of like security forces like in the West Bank, those stuff that works with the Israeli government. And would probably mean, just like in previous negotiated deals, that the Israelis would be controlling Palestinian airspace as well. Now, the airspace thing is me speculating. I didn't see that in the deal or the proposal, but I'm saying that that would almost probably be part of them being a demilitarized state, as it was what was negotiated at the Oslo Accords as well, and was somewhat a sticking point. So that deal, the majority of Israelis are in favor of, and it's double digits difference. It's not a close race. So when given those circumstances, when they hear that the Palestinian state would be demilitarized in that way and that the rebuilding would be handled by the Arab world, and then I assume, and this is me assuming, they think about the other options, the alternatives, a continued deployment in the West Bank. You poll Israelis, do they want Israeli troops in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip 3 years from now? They say no. But if you want to control the Gaza Strip directly, and you don't want there to be some sort of autonomous form of Palestinian government that will eventually evolve into a state, or evolve into something resembling a state at the very least, I don't know, call it a state, whatever you want to call it, a statelet, I don't know. If you don't, then that means you're going to have troops deployed there. And it sounds like you're ultimately pursuing a one-state solution, which I don't think is going to lead to peace. And if that is the goal of the Israeli government, I don't feel like we have any reason whatsoever. In fact, I think it's actually would be negative for our American national security. I think it would endanger American troops. I think it would endanger American personnel in the region to continue to support them if that is their goal. And I do believe that at least some Netanyahu government in the coalition, when we talk about people like Ben-Gvir, would at the very least smile at the proposal.
Part of that moderation must include rejecting right-wing zealots like ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the extremist Israeli settlers in the West Bank. These people do not represent a majority of the Israeli public, yet under Prime Minister Netanyahu's watch, they have had far too much influence. All sides must reject from river to the sea thinking, and I believe they will if the prospects for peace and a two-state solution are real. Beyond the Israeli and Palestinian people and their leaders, there are others who bear a serious responsibility to work towards a two-state solution. Without them, it cannot succeed. Middle Eastern powers like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, other mainstream Arab states can have immense power and influence with the Palestinians. Working with the United States, they must responsibly deploy their clout, their money, and their diplomacy to support a new demilitarized Palestinian state that rejects terror and violence. I believe they have the leverage to do this with the support of the majority of the Palestinian people who want what any other people want: peace, security, prosperity. I believe there is enough strength in the Arab world to get President Abbas to step down and to support a gradual succession plan for responsible Palestinian leaders to take his place. Hamas.
Sorry, muted. This is the big problem, though. Who is that leader? Some people talk about people who are imprisoned or people who are in exile, but I mean, I haven't seen any serious proposal. I don't know how you would even lay this out before sitting down, doing negotiations, talking to those on the ground. I doubt Chuck Schumer himself has this proposal, but that is a question that people need to ask. Who would be that leader? Because it's not like, okay, fine, Hamas is gone, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, it's time for you, it's your time now. Like, who's that leader?
Hamas has so wrecked society in Gaza that it will take outside involvement of Arab countries to help rebuild something better and more sustainable. It may take some time to identify such leaders, but with the considerable resources of the Arab world backing them, I believe these leaders can and will emerge, knowing that they have support. The outlines of a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel that were reported before October 7th still make a great deal of sense and can be the catalyst for the creation of a viable Palestinian state. Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations should continue to pursue normalization with Israel, and this should be the foundation of a grand bargain in the Middle East that will finally make meaningful Palestinian statehood a reality. For our part, the United States, the world superpower, must work together with our allies to bring our immense diplomatic and financial power to bear on this situation. We can be a partner to a grand bargain in the Middle East by deepening our relationship with the Saudis and other Arab nations to induce them to make a deal, but only if they actively guide
people in the chat. I saw somebody say in the gutter chat, like, there are people in the West Bank who are truly moderate. It's not just a question of if somebody's truly moderate. It's also a question of whether Palestinians will respect that person to lead them. I feel like, because this is the problem, and this is the same thing I want us to not do in Ukraine. I feel like a lot of times when people start, getting the fucking maps out and shit, you know what I mean? Okay, you get that part of the country, you get this part of the country, you get that. And they start carving up countries. They start carving up and saying, okay, this is how it's going to work. We don't have local leaders at the table. And so local considerations that should be taken into consideration, that only locals and people who live in that environment understand, it leads to failures. This is why I like democracy, is because I believe that individuals probably are the best, know the best on how to run their lives and what the problems are in their lives. You drive down the street, you see a pothole, Okay, go tell your local county councilman or city councilman, you call local authority, and then they deal with the pothole. That's how a democracy should work. That's the reactive nature of a person seeing a problem, acting the representative, they deal with it. That's how it should work. And so if we just take somebody and just throw them in there just because they're moderate and they won't literally want to declare war on Israel or go to war with Israel, that can't just be the only standard. They have to be respected enough by Palestinians to be able to lead them and for them to respect that authority. And so another body doesn't come in and fill the power vacuum. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas. This isn't just a problem in Israel and between Israel, Gaza, and Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's a problem in other countries too. Lebanon has this problem as well with Hezbollah challenging local authority down south, having their own armed forces, a military that's actually stronger than the Lebanese armed forces. Anyway, where were we?
Palestinians to a more peaceful future. On the Israeli side, the U.S. government should demand that Israel conduct itself with a future two-state solution in mind.
True.
We should not be forced into a position of unequivocally supporting the actions of an Israeli government that include bigots who reject the idea of a Palestinian state.
True.
Israel is a democracy. 5 months into this conflict, it is clear that Israelis need to take stock of the situation and ask, must we change course? At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about.
Now, this is, while I agree that there should be new elections, the majority of Israelis polled say they want new elections, right? Now, those same Israelis also say that they want this war to be taken to its conclusion by this Netanyahu, Benny Gantz unity government. But they also do want new early elections. The problem is, though, Netanyahu is going to be building the foundations for the after, the after the war is done, while the war is going on. That's certainly happening now. And whoever has to manage the after has to deal with how the war was managed, what infrastructure was destroyed, how many people were killed, dealing with local sentiment on the ground.
About the future of Israel at a time when so many.
And also, I just want to throw out there, having an American politician come out and say, this is what should happen in your country, that isn't going to be always received, or even very often received as, well, thank you, Uncle Sam. Thank you for telling me how to manage my country. Some people might view this. In fact, I would say this might be a sizable amount of Israelis who view this who's like, it's not your job to tell us when to have elections. It's not your job to tell us who should or should not be leading our country. That's the job of the Israeli public. Now, of course, he can give his opinion on that, and I agree with his opinion. I don't think somebody who couldn't keep Israel safe in the first place is the person to A, manage a war, or B, manage the after the war, after it's all wrapped up, especially with somebody who's shown at least a little bit of disdain, a little bit of disdain's underselling it, to the system of checks and balances that have been established in Israel. So he can share his opinion, and I think he's correct. But I also want to put out there that while this might add a certain amount of diplomatic pressure, and it certainly is going to cause some panic in Tel Aviv over the idea, like, man, this guy is really supportive of us, and this is a really harsh statement, and this is the most senior Jewish politician in the country, senior Democrat leader in the Senate. Like, all of that can exist. They can acknowledge all of that. They can see all of that and still be like, it's not his job to inform us on who to vote for. And so if you're thinking that Chuck Schumer is going to convince the Israeli public to throw out Netanyahu, I think you're overestimating the influence that this man has. But it is a strong signal, and signals do have impact.
Many Israelis have lost their confidence in the vision and direction of their government. I also believe a majority of the Israeli public will recognize the need for change, and I believe that holding a new election once the war starts to wind down would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future. Of course, the United States cannot dictate the outcome of an election, nor should we try. That is for the Israeli public to decide, a public that I believe understands better than anybody that Israel cannot hope to succeed as a pariah opposed by the rest of the world. As a democracy, Israel has the right to choose its own leaders, and we should let the chips fall where they may. But the important thing is that Israelis are given a choice. There needs to be a fresh debate about the future of Israel after October 7th. In my opinion, that is best accomplished by holding an election. Now, if Prime Minister Netanyahu's current coalition remains in power after the war begins to wind down and continues to pursue dangerous and inflammatory policies that test existing U.S. standards for assistance, then the United States will have no choice but to play a more active role in shaping Israeli policy by using our leverage to change the present course.
I'm sorry, that's much more. Wow, that's much more than I expected from Chuck Schumer. I knew it was a harsh speech, but him saying we're going to use it, this is what I've been asking for. This is what I've been asking for since the start. Is for them to say we'll use our leverage. That means, fine, you're going to take this path that is going to spiral into a new wave of violence that we don't want to support, then you're not going to get our aid. You're not going to get our military aid. You're not going to get our assistance. You're on your own. We do not have to give them this. Definitely if they're dragging us into a situation. We didn't make a commitment that we would help them do any military operation to possibly permanently occupy a strip of land that the international community does not recognize as theirs, and therefore endangers our troops just through the osmosis of hate that is going to be directed at Israel and then us for supporting them throughout the region. We already lost 3 troops in Jordan due to the spillover of this violence and a drone attack by Iranian-backed forces. Point is, this is what I've been waiting for a while for the American left and those elected in the Democratic Party to do. I just didn't think they'd do it. I didn't. I thought that they would just keep their head down until it was over. Now, of course, this is just a speech. This is not an action. Just a few months ago, Bernie Sanders tried to bring a resolution to just have an investigation into how our weapons are being used by the Israeli government to look for war crimes and abuses, and it was shot down. So to see that type of shift in the U.S. Senate so quick, where on one hand, it feels like they don't want to look behind the curtain because they don't know what they might not like what they see, and that could have an impact on whether or not we can send aid to Israel or not. So I just didn't expect this so soon between that and now. I wonder what's motivating this push. Is it the culmination of certain attacks, like the attack on the aid trucks or the bombing of the Greek Orthodox Church? Is it the knowledge that we know that the Israelis are planning to go into Rafah now, even though the Biden administration didn't want them to? Is it the failure of the Israeli government or the policy of the Israeli government to completely bat away the idea of a two-state solution? I think it's a bunch of straws that came together, and eventually the camel's back broke. And this is the situation we're in for Chuck Schumer. Not to mention, as the non-committed votes come in, there's a reason in places like Michigan to try to win those voters back. This would be one of the ways you would try to do it. And if there was anybody that would, I think, have the most cover to make these critiques due to their long, extensive history of supporting Israel, it'd be Chuck Schumer. What are you going to say? Chuck Schumer is a raging anti-Israel, anti-Semite? Is that what? You can't. People pull that stuff out against Ilhan Omar. People pull that stuff out against Rashida Tlaib for a multitude of reasons that I don't want to get into right now. But you can't pull that stuff against Chuck Schumer. But now all you need is Steny Hoyer to come out and say the same thing in the House, and then I'll know I've died and that this is not real.
The United States' bond with Israel is unbreakable. But if extremists continue to unduly influence Israeli policy, then the administration should use the tools at its disposal to make sure our support for Israel is aligned with our broader goal of achieving long-term peace and stability in the region. I believe this would make a lasting two-state solution more likely. Now, I know that there are many on both sides who question how we can discuss peace at a moment like this. So many Gazans are displaced from their homes and struggling to meet their most basic needs. Many are still burying and mourning their dead. Entire families have been wiped out. In Israel, everyone knows someone who was killed on October 7th. So many Israelis feel that people around the world have no respect for the grief and rage unleashed by Hamas's vicious attack. So, is there real hope for peace and a two-state solution? In the face of this atrocity, who could blame even the most hopeful among us for hardening their hearts, for giving up on the possibility of peace, for giving in to the hate? I seek my inspiration in the example of leaders who've come before us and worked for peace in the face of extreme circumstances.
Okay, all he has to do, and I love Dr. King, just don't do a needless Dr. King reference.
Some of Israel's greatest...
Okay, sorry. I respect Dr. King with all of my heart and all of my bones, but man, just, yeah, he'll get thrown into speeches that you're just like, that came out of nowhere. Okay. My Dr. King's reference censor to a politician citing them and saying, oh, Dr. King would agree with me. It's just started to go off, but false alarm.
Warriors and security experts have been staunch advocates for peace because they understand better than anybody that it's essential to Israel's security. David Ben-Gurion, Yitzhak Rabin, Ehud Barak, all of them sought peace with the Palestinians.
I mean, let me hear that list again.
David Ben-Gurion.
Well, didn't he have agents attempt to poison Palestinian wells in order to try to get them to flee their villages during the war in 48? I mean, that doesn't mean he didn't want any type of treaty at any time, but I mean, peace and what, man? Anyway, continuing, sorry. But of course, all of these people would be more willing to negotiate than Netanyahu. Every single one of them. That is true.
Yitzhak Rabin, Ehud Barak, all of them sought peace with the Palestinians. On the Palestinian side, we don't have to look very far back to see a model of responsible leadership. Salam Fayyad, the former prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, who was clear in his condemnation of violence against the Israelis. And for the Arab leaders of today, may they find inspiration in Anwar el-Sadat of Egypt and King Hussein of Jordan, who had the courage and vision.
Is that a confirmed story or hearsay? It has to do with intelligence documents that were posted publicly or released publicly. Israel 1948 war, wells poisoned Ben-Gurion. Here it is. This is from Haaretz, an Israeli publication. Place the material in the wells. Docs point to Israeli Army's 1948 biological warfare. For decades, rumors and testimony swirled about the Jewish troops set to poison wells in Arab villages. Now researchers have located official documentation of Cast Thy Bread operation.
To seek peace with Israel. Before October 7th, things were moving in the right direction. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia both were on the path to normalization with Israel, and with conditions that would greatly benefit the lives of the Palestinian people. Many believe that...
So who is Schumer addressing here? Who is his audience? I mean, it's hard to say. I think part of it might be the base of voters who are who are pretty unhappy with how Biden has handled it, and they think that he's been pillow-fisted on Israel. As we saw some non-committed votes in Michigan and some other states as well. Now, how many of those votes were due to this or due to other issues, we don't really know. When you vote uncommitted, you don't write on uncommitted, this is the reason I am voting uncommitted. But that could be a motivator to try to speak to those people. American Jews, generally speaking, don't like Netanyahu. American Jews, generally speaking, are pretty liberal. And so I would also say, as you know, Schumer being an American Jew is probably not as crazy to come from that community and critique Netanyahu specifically. And so I think I think as the senior ranking Jewish politician in the country, he might be speaking to that community somewhat. since he's giving kind of his personal opinion. It could be in large part supposed to be a diplomatic signal to the Israelis that there is a limit to how much even the most stalwart defenders of Israel's within the Democratic Party, which is the current ruling party in the United States, even if they don't control the House because of the Republican slim majority, that is not endless, that the United States is not going to give them ultimate flexibility and not have, as Senator Schumer put it, its leverage used, quote unquote. It's impossible because I have to read into his intentions behind the speech. He could just mean it and just want to say it. But he could speak into a few different audiences.
That Iran.
I doubt that he's actually, I mean, he might think that he's trying to influence the Israeli public, but I don't know how much this is actually going to influence the Israeli public to push for an election. I don't know of many instances of foreign politicians pushing for elections, building domestic support that substantially. Because I mean, it's not impossible to like give confidence, like, oh, I guess our call for election isn't that crazy because other people want elections too. But I don't think it's going to push them in that direction. I don't think people generally like being told by foreigners who to vote for or what to do with their country domestically. But that doesn't mean it can't have diplomatic pressure or couldn't galvanize them to some extent. But it's all guesswork on like how much of an impact it would have. I don't think much.
Motivated Hamas to disrupt this process. And indeed, there have been setbacks since October 7th. But recent talks between Arab and American leaders suggest the desire is stronger than ever now to find a path forward. Arab leaders cannot lose their stomachs for peace now at this critical inflection point. They must continue to pursue the path to normalization with Israel. And the U.S. should use all of its power to influence and bring them to the table and make them cooperate constructively. If my speaking out today has any effect, it will probably have greater influence on the Israeli and Jewish side of things. But if this conflict is to be resolved...
Okay, so I was right about at least the Jewish community. And again, the Israeli public, I just don't know how much of an impact it's going to have. I mean, the Jewish community in the United States does have ties with the Israeli public, so, you know, there could be some inroads there, but I think it would be more maybe downstream and diplomatic.
We need comparable Palestinian and Arab leaders to also speak responsibly to their people about the path forward to peace. Now is the time for courageous leadership. After Israelis and Palestinians have experienced so much horror and loss of life, to not have something meaningful come out of this war would be doubly tragic. History will look back on what we do here. Are we prepared together to have the courage to make an all-out push to bring about peace once and for all, to bring to this conflict what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the fierce urgency.
I fucking knew it. I'm sorry. Every time I can sense it. I can sense it. It wasn't at that moment. It wasn't at that moment. But my Dr. King alarm was going off, and it was like the Spidey sense. I was like, oh, I guess I missed it. Nope, it was there. I was right.
Conflict, what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called the fierce urgency of now, to end the cycles of tragedy and of pain. I have always said that when horrific things happen, some turn inwards and let their grief consume them, while others light a candle and turn their grief into power. They are able to see hope in the darkness. In Scripture, we read about how God created the world from an infinite void, that out of the greatest darkness can come the greatest light. I hope and pray that from the brutal slaying of Israelis by Hamas and the harrowing civilian toll in Gaza, that a two-state solution where Jews and Palestinians can live in peace will prevail. I know I'm not alone in this prayer. There are right now Palestinians in Gaza, some of whom are still pulling dead family members from the rubble, who are defying Hamas and their murderous ideology and calling for a pathway to peace. There are right now some families of the victims of October 7th in Israel who have been calling for peace, asking their government to transcend the cycle of bloodshed and revenge. If they can find in their hearts a path to peace, then surely we can also.
That was much harsher than I expected. I definitely didn't expect. I expected a call for the election because I had already heard about that. I expected a call for a new election in Israel. I still doubt how much of an impact it's actually going to have on the Israeli public. I think it might have more diplomatic impact and impact on the American Jewish community, which therefore could have downstream effects on Israel. But I don't think Israel, I don't know how many people in the Israeli society, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't want an election. Then Chuck Schumer, the American senator, told me, that's why maybe more indirectly, I think maybe it'd be more influential for Chuck Schumer says this than an American Jew calls a family member in Israel and says, I don't think we're going to have peace until, that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That maybe. But I didn't expect him to say the leverage part, to even suggest at all that American support for Israel when it comes to, military support could be on the table to be taken off. Now, that's not because I think it's impossible that this could ever happen. It's never been something that American politicians have done. It's just in the last 40 years, it's been very, very taboo. Ronald Reagan, and this is the problem with being a kind of seen as a peacenik going into office versus a hawk going into office. A lot of times, if you're a hawk on something, then you have more flexibility to negotiate than if you're a peacenik. Let me give you an example. If you get into office and people think that you're kind of soft on an issue because of the possible, political effects, and because that's how people view you, and you want to make up for credibility that your opponent might not view you with, because if, let's say, you have an issue, a diplomatic issue with the Iranians, and the Iranians think you're soft on them, then they might think that they can get more out of you out of negotiations, and therefore somebody who goes into office as a peacenik ends up taking a more hardline position or hard position to try to build up credibility so they can negotiate from a semi-position of authority or peace. Like if somebody's complete message on the campaign trail going into the 2024 presidency was, we need to end peace now. We can't have war in any circumstance. We need to be peace. Then the Russians, when the negotiations comes around, they're just going to say, well, I know you have to have peace, so I can make whatever demand I want, and you have to do it because you want to pull out by the end of the year. You want to pull out of supporting Ukraine. And so that's why a lot of times people like Bernie Sanders, when he was asked if he'd be willing to use drone strikes and stuff like that, he said, hell yeah, I'd be willing to. And I think part of the enthusiasm in doing that is because people saw him as unexperienced on the issue of foreign policy, at least in the American political establishment. And he wanted to make up for that deficit. And that's why I think he gave that type of enthusiastic answer. But that also means on the other end of the spectrum that the hawks, those who are like, bomb them, what's your position on Russia? Bomb them again. And then when you think we've finished, bomb them a third time. If that's your position going into that, then most people are not going to think that that person is quote unquote weak on the issue. And so if they offer something diplomatically, I think a lot of people would accept oh, this is somebody who's strong on this issue. I think he's doing this because he generally wants peace instead of, oh, he's a pushover. And so therefore, those who are considered more hawkish might have more flexibility to maneuver, and they don't have the same issue when it comes to building credibility. And therefore, those who are the most hawkish might have the most maneuverability and strength in negotiations in order to try to find a solution from that position that they don't have to build up into. Now, that's not to say that hawks are the greatest at negotiation. This is just one paradigm that people have noticed. And a lot of this is also theoretical, right? This is IR theory after all. But I'm saying that because Chuck Schumer is the type of politician that has since he supported Israel for so long and so consistently and been in their quarter and is on top of that the leading Jewish American politician in the country, he has enough credibility as somebody who's pro-Israel that him coming out and saying this isn't just going to be seen as, oh, he's just soft on this issue. Oh, he's just weak. He's a pushover. He doesn't truly care about Israel. He has the flexibility to maneuver here in a way that other politicians might be more nervous to maneuver in this way. If there was somebody who, was sometimes supporting Israel, sometimes didn't, they might not have the same amount of flexibility to be able to say at the end of it, oh, what, you're really questioning my support for Israel? For example, people do question Ilhan Omar's, people do question Rashida Tlaib's, again, whether that's deserved or not. People can't do that to Chuck Schumer. He has that flexibility, and that he used here quite well.